Walking into a Woolworths between 1950 and 1990 meant experiencing something you never quite forgot, and the smell always hit you first. Popcorn from the snack counter mixed with cheap perfume drifting over from the cosmetics aisle. And then came the sounds. Parakeets squawked in the pet department while dishes clattered at the lunch counter, and wooden floors creaked under your feet with every step. You could buy almost anything in those stores. Goldfish and hammers and candy sold by the pound, a hot dog with a cherry Coke for less than $1. For millions of American kids, Woolworths felt like the first store that actually belonged to them, a place where a handful of coins could buy something real. Over 8,000 stores operated worldwide at the company's peak, making Woolworths the Amazon of its era, the one place where ordinary Americans could finally afford almost anything they wanted. The founder built an empire so successful that he paid cash for the tallest building in the world, and then everything disappeared. Every single store closed, and a 118-year-old American institution vanished from the landscape entirely. This is how one man's simple idea built a retail empire, how that empire became the unexpected battleground for civil rights in America, and how it all collapsed when the world changed faster than the company could adapt. Most people never learned the strangest part of this story. The man who built Woolworths couldn't sell anything to save his life. His first store failed in 3 months flat, and the idea that made him rich came from someone else entirely. Frank Winfield Woolworth came into the world on a farm in upstate New York in 1852, and nothing about his early years suggested greatness. Awkward and shy, with almost no formal education beyond basic schooling, he walked into Augsbury and Moore's dry goods store in Watertown, New York at age 21, desperate for any path off the farm. The store's owner looked him over and declared him too green to hire. Woolworth responded with a desperate counteroffer, volunteering to work for nothing at all, and the owner came back with his own terms. 6 months without pay, then maybe $3.50 a week if things worked out. Woolworth took the deal. Every account from that period painted him as terrible at the actual job. Customers made him nervous, and he couldn't close a sale to save his life. Too many questions. Not enough instincts. His boss eventually pulled him off the floor entirely and stuck him in the stockroom, far away from anyone trying to spend money. And that's when something unexpected happened. An economic depression hit in 1878, and the store needed to clear old inventory fast. Woolworth's boss told him to build a clearance display with everything priced at exactly 5 cents, no haggling and no negotiation, just one fixed price that anyone could understand instantly. The entire table sold out almost immediately. Woolworth noticed something in that moment that would reshape American retail permanently. When you strip away the friction of negotiation, ordinary people buy more, and they buy a lot more. The 5-cent table itself wasn't his invention, but the question that followed was pure Woolworth. What if an entire store worked that way? February 22nd, 1879 marked the opening of his first attempt, a shop in Utica, New York that he named Woolworth's Great 5-Cent Store. $300 worth of merchandise filled the shelves, items like thimbles and combs and soap and baby bibs and harmonicas, with every single thing priced at exactly 5 cents. No clerks pushed products on customers. Haggling didn't exist. Shoppers could actually pick up merchandise and examine it before buying, which broke from standard practice since most stores kept everything locked behind counters. The store survived 3 months before failing completely. Please do me a favor and drop a like to support the channel. Thanks. Foot traffic dried up once the initial curiosity faded, and the location simply couldn't support the concept. Woolworth shuttered the doors and headed home, carrying nothing but a lesson and a small pile of leftover capital. Most people would have abandoned the idea entirely after that kind of failure, but Woolworth opened another store just 4 months later. Lancaster, Pennsylvania became the site of his second attempt, and the store opened its doors on June 21st, 1879, with the same concept in the same 5-cent price point in a completely different market. Opening day brought sales of $127.65, which meant 31% of his entire inventory walked out the door in a single afternoon. $1,500 in profit accumulated by the end of that first year, a small fortune for 1879. The Lancaster store succeeded because Woolworth finally grasped something essential about his own idea. Low prices alone weren't the point. Access was the point. Shopping in that era meant asking a clerk to fetch items from behind a counter. But Woolworth let customers wander freely through his store. They could touch things and make decisions without anyone hovering over them or pushing for a sale. "I am the world's worst salesman," he admitted later, and that meant I had to make it easy for people to buy. That philosophy of removing every possible barrier between customer and purchase would eventually scale into something nobody anticipated, but scaling required partners and capital that Woolworth didn't have yet. Expansion couldn't happen fast enough on Woolworth's own resources, which led him to develop a partnership system. Family members and trusted associates would run individual stores while splitting profits 50-50, and Woolworth handled all the purchasing and initial setup on his end. His cousin opened stores across multiple states. His brother did the same. Competitors who watched his success asked to join rather than fight. 12 stores existed by 1889, and 28 stores generating over $1 million in combined sales operated by 1895. And that's when Woolworth made his most audacious move yet. 5 competing five-and-dime chains merged with his operation in 1912, including one owned by the very man who had once refused to pay him a salary. That single transaction put 596 stores across 37 states under Woolworth's control overnight. $65 million in capital backed the merged company, with Woolworth installed as president. What he wanted next was a monument. Construction began in 1910 on a skyscraper unlike anything New York had seen before. Woolworth commissioned architect Cass Gilbert with one clear instruction: make it Gothic, like the great cathedrals of Europe. The result stretched 792 feet into the sky across 57 stories, every surface covered in cream-colored terracotta with Gothic spires reaching upward. Opening day came on April 24, 1913, and President Woodrow Wilson participated from the White House by pressing a button that illuminated 80,000 light bulbs throughout the building at the same moment. A minister coined the nickname Cathedral of Commerce, and the label stuck permanently. One detail about the building captures Woolworth's character better than anything else. $13.5 million covered the total construction cost. Woolworth paid every cent of that amount in cash with no mortgage and no loans of any kind. Nickels and dimes had funded a monument to American retail, and the Woolworth building held the title of world's tallest for 17 years until the Chrysler building surpassed it in 1930. The structure still stands today at 233 Broadway in Manhattan as a National Historic Landmark. Though most pedestrians passing by have no idea what the building once represented, ask anyone who remembers Woolworths what they miss most, and merchandise rarely comes up first. The lunch counter dominates those memories instead. Woolworths began installing lunch counters in the 1920s, long formica surfaces lined with spinning stools where coffee cost a nickel and grilled cheese sandwiches and banana splits and cherry cokes kept customers lingering. Nearly 2,000 lunch counter units operated across America by the 1960s, pulling in $100 million in annual sales. Those counters served as more than places to eat. They functioned as social institutions in their communities. Housewives stopped in during errands, teenagers gathered after school let out, and old men nursed bottomless cups of coffee while reading the newspaper. Small towns often had no closer equivalent to a public square than the local Woolworth's lunch counter. Anyone with a dime could sit down and order, which made the space feel democratic in one sense, but anyone never actually meant everyone. Southern Woolworth's locations enforced segregation at their lunch counters, and the contradiction cut deep. Black customers could spend money on toothpaste and toys throughout the rest of the store, but sitting at the counter and ordering a cup of coffee like a human being wasn't permitted. Their dollars were welcome everywhere except at a spinning stool. That gap between accepting black money and rejecting black dignity would transform Woolworths into something its founder never could have predicted, turning an ordinary retail chain into the epicenter of the American Civil Rights Movement. 4 black freshmen from North Carolina A&T College walked into the Woolworths at 132 South Elm Street in Greensboro, North Carolina on the afternoon of February 1, 1960. Ezell Blair Jr., David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil had planned their approach carefully in advance. A stop at a local store owned by a white businessman who supported integration came first, giving him time to alert a newspaper reporter about what was coming. Standard purchases at the non-segregated counters followed, things like toothpaste and small items with receipts saved as proof of customer status. 4:30 in the afternoon marked the moment they sat down at the whites-only lunch counter and ordered coffee. The waitress refused to serve them, and they stayed in their seats. The store manager asked them to leave, and they remained where they were. A police officer showed up but lacked grounds for any arrest since the four men were paying customers who hadn't disturbed a single person. An older white woman approached their seats, and the students prepared themselves for hostility. What she actually said surprised everyone. "I am just so proud of you, and my only regret is that you didn't do this 10 or 15 years ago." The manager's supervisor dismissed the situation entirely, telling staff that the protesters would give up soon enough and be forgotten by the following week. They stayed until closing time at 5:30 and came back the next day. 29 additional students joined them on February 2nd, and 60 showed up the day after that. 300 protesters filled the store by February 5th, with picket lines forming on the sidewalk outside. 30 communities across 7 states had active sit-ins within 2 weeks of that first afternoon in Greensboro. 55 cities in 13 states joined by the end of March. 70,000 people participated in sit-ins by the end of 1960, and 3,000 of them faced arrest. Student leaders gathered at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina that April, and founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, an organization whose early membership included future Congressman John Lewis and future Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry. The Greensboro Sit-In didn't launch the civil rights movement on its own, but it sparked something that spread beyond anyone's ability to contain. Woolworths became the stage because Woolworths existed everywhere, and ubiquity made it the perfect target. $200,000 in sales vanished during the protests, an amount worth over $2 million in today's money. July 25, 1960 brought quiet desegregation to the Greensboro Woolworths lunch counter, and the first customers served under the new policy weren't the 4 freshmen who had started everything. 4 black Woolworths employees received that distinction instead, women who had worked in the store for years without ever being permitted to eat there. One of those women, Geneva Tisdale, still worked at that same Greensboro Woolworths when the store finally closed in 1993. Woolworths had already begun its long fade by the time the Greensboro Sit-In made national news, and the cause had nothing to do with civil rights. The problem came down to a single year, 1962. 3 new retailers launched operations during those 12 months, and all 3 would eventually bury the 5 and dime model completely. Kmart opened in March, Target followed in May, and Walmart arrived in July. Each one offered low prices and wide selection just like Woolworths, but their stores sprawled across suburban lots with massive parking areas and modern layouts designed for customers who drove. Woolworths remained anchored to downtown locations built for pedestrians, and the mismatch proved fatal. Company leadership tried to adapt with Woolco. Their own discount store format launched in 1962, the same year as all 3 competitors. Over 300 Woolco stores operated at the chain's peak. None of it worked well enough to matter. The stores hemorrhaged money year after year. September 1982 brought the announcement that every single Woolco location in America would close, all 336 stores affecting 25,000 jobs in what ranked as the largest retail liquidation in American history at that time. The original 5 and dimes continued shrinking through the 70s and 80s, with hundreds of stores closing quietly. The company's size masked how serious the decline had become, since pruning didn't feel like dying. What kept the corporate entity alive came from an unexpected direction entirely. A $45 million acquisition in 1963 had brought Kinney Shoes into the Woolworths portfolio, and Kinney launched a new concept in 1974 called Foot Locker. Athletic shoe sales exploded over the following 2 decades, and by the 1990s, Foot Locker generated over 70% of Kinney's total revenue. The company built on 5-cent trinkets survived only because $100 sneakers kept the books balanced. July 17, 1997 brought the announcement that all 400 remaining Woolworths stores in the United States would close permanently. 118 years of continuous operation ended with a corporate statement. Despite our best efforts and the hard work of the F.W. Woolworth team, the business continued to lose money, and it became clear that F.W. Woolworth would be unable, in the foreseeable future, to return to profitability. 9,200 workers lost their jobs in the shutdown. The corporate entity survived in altered form, renaming itself Venator Group in 1998 and then Foot Locker, Inc. in 2001. Frank Woolworth's company technically continued to exist, but nothing it sold would have looked familiar to its founder. The Woolworth building changed hands in 1998 after 85 years of family ownership, and the upper floors now contain luxury condominiums. That ornate lobby, with its Byzantine mosaics and marble walls, remains closed to the general public. An 8-foot section of the Greensboro lunch counter with 4 original stools sits in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History today, carefully removed in '93 and preserved as the most historically significant piece of furniture in American retail. Woolworths never vanished from the world completely. Over 800 stores still operate under the Woolworth name across Germany, owned by a private equity firm, with expansion plans covering the rest of Europe. 150 Mexican locations serve customers under the Del Sol Woolworth brand. Rumors even circulate about bringing the name back to Britain, where the chain remained beloved until its 2009 collapse. American Woolworths exists only in the memories of people old enough to remember what those stores felt like. The lesson buried in all of this has nothing to do with Frank Woolworth getting his original idea wrong. Fixed prices and self-service and letting customers handle merchandise before buying became the foundation of every modern retailer from Target to Amazon. Woolworth pioneered all of it. What killed the company was an inability to evolve as fast as America itself transformed. Suburbs sprawled outward, cars multiplied on every road, and big box stores rose on the edges of town. Woolworths stayed anchored to downtown sidewalks and creaky wooden floors and lunch counters that seated 20 people at a time, and none of that could compete with what came next. Frank Woolworth died in April of 1919, just 5 days before his 67th birthday, from an infected tooth that turned septic. The Depression and World War II and the sit-ins and the slow collapse of everything he created all happened after he was gone. Anyone old enough to remember Woolworths carries specific sensory details that never fade. The smell of popcorn mixing with perfume, parakeets squawking near the entrance, spinning stools at a lunch counter where a few coins bought a grilled cheese, and a sense of belonging. The stores closed a long time ago now, but memories like those tend to outlast the buildings that created them.